Logan Whitaker punched the wall so hard the framed metals rattled. Then he dropped to his knees beside his daughter's bed and pressed his forehead against her tiny, feverish hand. "You're not going anywhere, baby girl. You hear me? Not on my watch." 6 years earlier, he'd buried the only woman he ever loved, and he swore he'd never fail another soul under his roof. So when a billionaire CEO looked him dead in the eye and whispered, "I wish I had a happy family like yours," this hardened Navy man laughed and said the one thing that would change all 3 of their lives forever. "My kid probably needs a mom more than I need another medal." He was joking. She wasn't. And what happened next left an entire naval base speechless. Before we go further, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe a father's love can rebuild a broken home, hit that subscribe button and stay with me all the way to the end. You won't want to miss what this little girl does in part 4. The alarm never got the chance to ring. Logan Whitaker was already sitting up on the edge of the mattress at 4:52 in the morning, both feet on the cold floor, staring at the door across the hall, the way a man stares at a mission briefing. 8 years in the Navy had trained his body to wake before the world did. But it wasn't the Navy that pulled him upright this morning. It was the sound of a small cough coming from the room where his daughter slept. He crossed the hall in 3 steps and cracked the door open. "Sophie," he whispered. The little shape under the blanket stirred. "Daddy, it's still dark." "I know, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. I just heard you cough." "I'm okay," she mumbled, already sinking back into her pillow. Bad dream about the whale again. "The whale can't get you in here," Logan said. "This house is a submarine. Nothing gets in without my say-so." She giggled without opening her eyes. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." He pulled the blanket up to her chin, tucked the edge under her shoulder the way Emily used to, and stood there in the dark for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went to make breakfast. By 5:15, the small kitchen smelled like coffee and cinnamon toast. Logan moved through it without thinking, the way a sailor moves across a deck in rough water. Automatic balanced sure. He cracked 2 eggs into the pan, cut the crusts off Sophie's toast, because she wouldn't eat it otherwise, and lined up her vitamins next to a glass of orange juice. On the refrigerator behind him, held up by a magnet shaped like an anchor, was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, a tall one, a small one, and a third one drawn slightly higher than the rest with wings. Logan didn't look at that drawing. He'd trained himself not to most mornings. It was easier that way. At 5:40, he went back down the hall and sat on the edge of her bed. "Rise and shine, sailor," he said. "Sun's coming up whether we're ready or not." Sophie groaned and pulled the blanket over her face. 5 more minutes. "That's what you said yesterday, and the day before. You know what happens to sailors who sleep in. They walk the plank," she said from under the blanket. "They walk the plank," he agreed, "straight into a cold shower." She threw the blanket off and sat up, hair sticking out in every direction, 1 sock on and 1 sock gone. 7 years old, and already she looked at the world with her mother's exact eyes, dark, quick, and far too smart for her age. Every time Logan saw those eyes first thing in the morning, something in his chest both broke and healed at once. "Daddy," she said, "is today the day you leave again?" He'd been waiting for that question. He always dreaded it. "Not today," he said carefully, "but soon. There's a big event at the base first. Real important people coming. Important like the president. Not the president, but important. A company that builds things for the Navy. Big money folks in fancy suits." He handed her a hairbrush. "Now sit still and let me fix this bird's nest." She sat between his knees on the floor while he worked the tangles out of her hair gentle as he could, 1 small section at a time. His hands were rough hands, built for rope and steel and cold water, but he'd taught them to be careful with a little girl's curls. It had taken him a full year after Emily died to learn how to do a French braid off a phone tutorial at 2 in the morning, cursing under his breath, starting over 100 times. He still wasn't great at it. But Sophie never complained. "Ow," she said. "Sorry, baby. You always say sorry." That's because I mean it. She was quiet for a second. Then, Marcus's mom does his sister's hair way better than you. Logan's hands paused, just for a second. Then they kept moving. I bet she does, he said evenly. Marcus's mom's had a lot more practice than your old man. Do you wish I had a mom? The brush stopped again. This time it took him longer to start it back up. Logan had learned a long time ago that you couldn't lie to a child, not the smart ones, and definitely not this one. She'd catch it. She always caught it. So he did what he'd trained himself to do every single time this conversation crept up on him. He told the truth, but he told it in a way a 7-year-old could carry. I wish you had your mama, he said quietly. Every single day. Because she loved you more than the whole ocean loves the shore. But you and me, we're doing all right, aren't we? Sophie leaned her head back against his chest. Yeah, she said. We're doing all right. Damn right we are, he said. And she gasped and laughed because he'd said a bad word, and just like that, the heavy thing that had settled over the room floated away again. He finished the braid. It was crooked. It was always a little crooked. Sophie never seemed to mind. The commute to the base was 14 minutes on a good day. Logan dropped Sophie at the elementary school, 2 miles down the road, watched her run up the steps with her backpack bouncing, waited until she was all the way inside the door before he pulled away. He never left before she was inside. That was a rule he'd made with himself, and he'd never once broken it. At the gate, Petty Officer Reyes waved him through and leaned toward the window. Big day, Chief. You ready for the circus? Since when am I ready for anything? Logan said. Reyes grinned. Word is the Caldwell woman herself is coming. In the flesh. You know how much that contract's worth? More than my whole life, probably. More than this whole base, probably. Reyes stepped back and threw a lazy salute. Try not to say anything stupid to a billionaire, huh? No promises, Logan said and drove through, and the name meant almost nothing to him. Victoria Caldwell. He'd heard it around the base for weeks, the way you hear a weather report, something happening somewhere above your pay grade, something that would come and go without touching your actual life. Defense technology, guidance systems, contracts with more zeros than he could count. The kind of person whose face was on the cover of magazines in the checkout line, the kind of person who had never in her life cut the crusts off a piece of toast at 5 a.m. Logan parked, straightened his uniform in the reflection of the truck window, and walked toward the hangar where the whole event was being staged. Folding chairs, a podium, a banner with 2 logos on it. Somewhere in the back, sailors were setting out coffee and pastries on long tables, like it was a wedding nobody wanted to attend. Chief Petty Officer Dale Hutchins found him near the coffee, already halfway through a cup. There he is, Dale said. The single dad the whole base can't stop talking about? Nobody's talking about me, Dale. Everybody's talking about you. Dale clapped him on the shoulder. Ellen wants you and the little one over for dinner Sunday, by the way. She won't take no. Says you 2 survive on toast and cereal, and it's a national tragedy. We survive fine. That's not a no. Dale sipped his coffee. How's Sophie? She's still doing that thing where she reorganizes your whole kitchen. Logan actually smiled. Found the spatulas in the sock drawer last week. That kid's gonna run this Navy someday. That kid's gonna run the whole country, and God help us all, Logan said, and Dale laughed, and for a moment it was easy the way it used to be, easy back when Emily was alive and the world made more sense. Then Dale's face changed a little, got softer, got careful. Logan knew that face. He'd seen it on 100 people over 6 years. Hey, Dale said quietly. You know it's coming up right the date. Logan's jaw tightened. I know. Ellen and me, we just, if you need anything. I know, Dale. Thank you. I mean it. He set his coffee down. But I'm good. Sophie's good. We got a rhythm now. We're fine. Dale looked like he wanted to say more. Wisely, he didn't. He just nodded and let it go. 6 years. In 4 days, it would be 6 years to the day, Since Emily Whitaker walked into a hospital with a headache, she said was nothing, and never walked back out. An aneurysm, the doctors said. Nothing anyone could have done, the doctors said. She was 31 years old. Sophie was one. Logan had been at sea when the call came through 1,200 miles from home, and he'd stood on the deck of a destroyer in the middle of the night holding a satellite phone while a chaplain told him his wife was gone and his daughter was in the care of a neighbor. He remembered the exact sound the ocean made that night. He'd never been able to forget it. Some sounds get inside a man and stay there. He'd flown home. He'd buried her. And then he'd done the only thing a man in his position could do. He'd figured out how to keep breathing one day at a time for the sake of a little girl who still couldn't say a full sentence yet, but who reached for him every single time he walked into a room. People told him back then that he couldn't do it. A Navy career and an infant daughter. They said it kindly, most of them. They said it like they were trying to help. You'll need to get out, Logan. You'll need family. You'll need a wife. A child needs a mother. A sailor can't raise a baby alone. He'd listened to every one of them. And then he'd ignored every one of them. Because he'd made a promise standing beside a casket to a woman who could no longer hear him. He promised her their daughter would grow up knowing what it felt like to be loved so hard, it filled up all the empty spaces. He didn't know how he'd keep that promise. He only knew he would die before he broke it. 6 years later, here he was, still in uniform, still a father, still keeping the promise one crooked braid at a time. The event began at 10. Logan wasn't supposed to be anything more than a face in the crowd, one uniform among 50 standing at attention, while brass and money shook hands and posed for photographs. He'd been assigned to the reception detail almost as an afterthought, mostly because his commanding officer liked him and thought a decorated chief with a clean record made the base look good. Victoria Caldwell arrived in a black car that cost more than Logan would earn in 3 years. He watched her step out of it, the way you'd watch weather roll in, with a kind of distant, respectful attention. She was tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal suit so sharp it looked like it had been engineered rather than sewn. She shook hands with the Admiral. She smiled for the cameras. She said all the right things at the podium about partnership and innovation, and the brave men and women who serve. And Logan, standing off to the side with his hands clasped behind his back, thought, "That is the loneliest-looking woman I have ever seen in my life." He couldn't have told you why. She was smiling. She was surrounded by people. She was one of the most powerful individuals in the entire country. But he'd spent 6 years learning what loneliness looked like when it was hiding behind a good face. He saw it in the mirror every morning. And he saw it in her now in the way her smile switched on and off like a light, rather than growing and fading like a real one. In the way her eyes moved across the crowd looking for something and never finding it. He noticed it, and then he told himself it wasn't any of his business and went back to standing at attention. After the speeches came the part everyone actually cared about. The informal reception, the mingling, the moment when the important people got to walk among the ordinary ones and pretend briefly that they were all the same. Logan's CO waved him over to a small cluster of officers who'd been asked to sit with the guests for lunch. He hadn't wanted to. He went anyway because that was the job. That was how Logan Whitaker ended up seated 4 feet away from a billionaire. He didn't try to impress her. That was the thing that Victoria noticed first, though he had no idea she'd noticed anything at all. Every other person at that table was leaning toward her, angling for something, laughing a little too hard at things that weren't funny. Logan just ate his lunch and answered questions when they were asked, and otherwise kept mostly quiet. When someone asked him how long he'd been in, he said 8 years. When someone asked about his last deployment, he gave a 2-sentence answer and left it there. He didn't perform. He didn't campaign. He was in a room full of people trying to be somebody simply himself, and beside his coffee cup propped up against the salt shaker where he could see it was a small worn photograph. Victoria's eyes kept drifting to it. It wasn't a fancy picture. It was a snapshot printed at a drugstore curling a little at one corner. It showed a man, this man, the quiet chief across the table, kneeling in the sand at the edge of the ocean with a little girl on his back. The girl had her arms wrapped around his neck and her mouth open in a scream of pure delight. The man was laughing so hard his eyes were nearly shut. Behind them, the water was going gold with evening light. It was the kind of photograph that most people would glance at and forget. Victoria Caldwell could not stop looking at it. "Is that your daughter?" she finally asked. Logan looked up, a little surprised to be addressed directly by the guest of honor. "Yes, ma'am, that's Sophie." "How old is she?" 7, going on 40. He almost smiled. "She's got opinions about everything. Woke me up this morning to tell me my braiding technique was, and I quote, a lot worse than Marcus's mom's." A couple of the officers chuckled. Victoria didn't laugh, but something in her face shifted. "You do her hair?" she asked. "Every morning. Somebody's got to." "And her mother?" She stopped herself. It was a reflexive question, the kind people ask without thinking, and Victoria caught it a half-second too late. Logan didn't flinch. He'd had 6 years of practice with this exact moment. "Her mother passed," he said simply, "when Sophie was 1. It's been just the two of us since." A silence fell over the table, the particular awkward silence that follows that kind of information. The other officers looked at their plates. One of them murmured a sorry to hear that. Logan nodded once the way he always did and reached for his coffee to signal the moment could pass. But Victoria didn't let it pass. She kept looking at the photograph. "You raised her alone," she said. It wasn't a question. "With a lot of help," Logan said. "Neighbors, guys on the base and their wives. My mother before she passed too. You don't do anything alone, ma'am, not really. But yeah, it's my name on the school forms. My job to remember which cereal she likes this week. It changes weekly in case you were wondering." That got a real laugh out of 2 of the officers. Victoria almost smiled. "That sounds exhausting," she said. "It's the best job I ever had," Logan said. And he said it so plainly, so completely without performance, that the whole table went quiet again. But a different kind of quiet this time. The kind that comes when someone says something true in a room that isn't used to hearing true things. Victoria Caldwell looked at this man. This ordinary man in an ordinary uniform with rough hands and a drugstore photograph and a crooked braid he'd made himself that morning. She looked at him, and she looked at the little girl screaming with joy on his back in the golden light, and something happened in her chest that she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. It wasn't envy exactly. It was deeper than that, and older, and it hurt in a way she couldn't name. The conversation moved on. Someone brought up the contract. Someone else asked Victoria about her company's newest project, and she answered smoothly, professionally, the way she'd answered 10,000 times before. But her eyes kept coming back to that photograph. And Logan, watching her without seeming to, saw the loneliest-looking woman he'd ever seen get lonelier by the minute, in a room full of people who all wanted something from her. He almost said something. He didn't know what. He held his tongue. Lunch wound down. Plates were cleared. The Admiral stood to make a few more remarks and thank the distinguished guest for her time. It was all winding toward the polite, forgettable ending that these things always wound toward: handshakes, photographs, a black car pulling away. And then, in the small lull before the closing remarks, while the table was quiet and the officers were finishing their coffee, Victoria Caldwell did something no one at that table expected. She was still looking at the photograph. She didn't seem entirely aware she was speaking out loud. Her voice, when it came, was low and strange and completely stripped of all the polish she'd worn all morning. "I wish I had a happy family like yours," she said. The table went silent. It was the kind of silence you could feel on your skin. Every officer at that table froze mid-motion. A billionaire, a woman who owned aircraft and buildings and pieces of the future itself, had just looked at a Navy chief with a drugstore photograph and said out loud in front of witnesses that she envied him. Nobody knew what to do with it. Nobody knew where to put it. The Admiral 3 seats down hadn't heard, but everyone else had, and they were all waiting for someone to break the terrible, tender quiet. Logan looked at her, and here is where the whole thing turned. Because Logan Whitaker had spent 6 years learning a single hard-won survival skill: when a moment got too heavy to carry, you made it lighter or it crushed you. He'd done it 1,000 times. At the funeral, when a well-meaning aunt collapsed, sobbing, and he'd had to be the strong one. At 3 in the morning with a screaming infant and no wife to trade shifts with. At every parent-teacher conference, where he was the only father in a room full of mothers. He'd learned to reach for a joke the way other men reach for a bottle, because it kept him standing. So he reached for one now. He picked up his coffee cup, gave Victoria a crooked, tired, kind half smile, and said the words that an entire naval base would be repeating by nightfall. "Well, ma'am, honestly, my kid probably needs a mom more than I need another medal." The table cracked. The officers laughed. Big, relieved, grateful laughs, the tension breaking like a wave. Even the admiral, catching only the tail end, chuckled along without knowing why. It was a good joke. It was a perfect joke. It took a moment that had been about to break the whole table and turned it into something everyone could smile at and walk away from and forget. Everyone laughed. Everyone except Victoria Caldwell. She didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She sat perfectly still, and she looked at Logan Whitaker with an expression that made the laughter around her seem suddenly very far away. Because she had heard the joke. And underneath the joke, she had heard something else. Something Logan didn't even know he'd put there. She had heard a father who was carrying loneliness just as heavy as her own. She had heard a man who made everyone else laugh so that no one would ask how he was really doing. She had heard in that one throwaway line the sound of her own life echoed back at her from across a table, the same emptiness dressed in different clothes. He was joking to survive the moment. She recognized it because it was exactly what she had been doing for 20 years. The laughter faded. The officers went back to their coffee. The admiral tapped his glass and began his closing remarks. And Logan, thinking the moment was over, set his cup down and turned to listen politely. But Victoria was still watching him. And she'd made a decision, the kind of fast, decisive, unreasonable decision that had built her entire empire, the kind she made in boardrooms, when everyone told her to wait and she refused. She didn't know yet what she was going to do with it. She only knew with the certainty that had never once failed her in business, that she was not going to let this be the last time she spoke to Logan Whitaker. After the event ended, Logan lingered at the coffee table longer than he needed to, helping the younger sailors stack chairs. He liked the quiet after these things. The important people were gone. The cameras were packed away. It was just uniforms and folding chairs, and the ordinary, comfortable business of putting a room back the way you found it. Dale found him again. "You," Dale said, jabbing a finger at his chest. "You are unbelievable. What I do now? My kid needs a mom more than I need another medal." Dale shook his head, half laughing. To Victoria Caldwell, in front of the admiral. "Whitaker, you have a death wish, you know that." "It was a joke, Dale." "I know it was a joke. Everybody knows it was a joke. That's why it's the best thing anybody's said on this base in a year." Dale clapped him on the back. You should have seen the admiral's face. Man nearly choked on his coffee. Logan smiled a little and kept stacking chairs. But something was nagging at him, and after a minute he said it out loud because it wouldn't leave him alone. "She didn't laugh, though." "What?" "Caldwell. Everybody laughed. She didn't." Logan set another chair on the stack. "She just looked at me, like I'd said something that hurt her." Dale shrugged. "Rich people are weird, man. Don't lose sleep over it." "Yeah," Logan said. "Probably." But he didn't quite believe it. He kept seeing her face the way it had gone still. The way her eyes had held his across the table, like she was trying to memorize something. He'd made a joke to lighten the room the way he always did. And for the first time in 6 years, it felt like the joke hadn't worked. Not because it wasn't funny, but because somebody had seen straight through it. He finished stacking the chairs. He signed out. He drove the 14 minutes back toward the school with the radio off, thinking about a woman he'd probably never see again. At 3:05, he pulled up to the elementary school. And there she was. Sophie, sitting on the low brick wall by the front steps, backpack in her lap, watching for his truck, the way she watched for it every single day. The second she spotted him, her whole face lit up. She jumped off the wall and ran braid bouncing, and Logan barely had time to open the door before she launched herself at him. "Daddy!" He caught her the way he always caught her and swung her up onto his hip, even though she was getting too big for it, even though his back complained, because there would come a day soon when she'd be too old for this, and he was going to squeeze every last one of these days for everything it had. "There's my sailor," he said into her hair. "How was the voyage?" Marcus put a worm on my desk and I screamed, and Mrs. Halloran said worms are our friends, but Daddy, they are not our friends. "They're absolutely not our friends," Logan agreed, buckling her into the back seat. "And then we did math and I got a star look. Look." She thrust a wrinkled worksheet at him with a gold sticker in the corner. "And then," Emma said, "her mom is taking her to get ice cream. And can we get ice cream? Can we please, please, please?" "We'll see." "We'll see" means yes. "We'll see" means we'll see. It means yes, Sophie said with total confidence and buckled her own seatbelt with a decisive click. And Logan laughed and shut the door and thought not for the first time that this was the only thing in the whole wide world that had ever made complete sense to him. They got ice cream. Of course they got ice cream. She got chocolate with rainbow sprinkles and got most of it on her shirt, and Logan didn't care because a shirt washes and a childhood doesn't come back around. They sat on a bench outside the little shop, and she told him about her day in exhausting, wonderful detail. And he listened to every word of it, like it was a mission briefing, because to him, it was the most important intelligence in the world. "Daddy," she said halfway through the cone chocolate on her chin, "did you meet the fancy suit people?" "I did." "Were they nice?" Logan thought about it. He thought about a photograph propped against a salt shaker, and a woman who didn't laugh when everyone else did, and the loneliest face he'd ever seen behind the most successful smile in the country. "There was a lady," he said slowly, "a real important lady. Owns a big company. Was she pretty?" "I guess she was." "Sure. Did she like your uniform?" "I don't think she noticed my uniform, baby." He wiped a smear of chocolate off her chin with his thumb. "You know what she noticed? She noticed your picture, the one from the beach, the one where you're screaming your head off on my back." Sophie giggled. "That's a good one." "It's the best one," Logan said. She looked at it for a real long time. Why? He didn't have an answer for that. Not one he could give a 7-year-old. Because how do you explain to a child that a stranger had looked at a snapshot of the two of you and seen something she'd give away her entire fortune to have? How do you explain that the richest person you ever met had looked at your crooked little family and said out loud that she wished it were hers? "I don't know, sweetheart," he said finally. "I guess some pictures are just special." Sophie leaned against his arm, tired now, sated with sugar and the long day. "Ours are all special," she said sleepily. Logan looked down at her chocolate on her shirt, a gold star crumpled in her fist, her mother's eyes half closed against the afternoon sun, and for a moment, he couldn't speak at all. 6 years he'd carried this. 6 years of alarms that never got to ring, of crooked braids and drugstore photographs and jokes made to keep himself standing. 6 years of people telling him a little girl needed a mother and him refusing to hear it because he'd made a promise and by God he was keeping it. "Yeah, baby," he managed. "They sure are." He carried her back to the truck when she fell asleep against him, ice cream cone abandoned, and he buckled her in gently so she wouldn't wake. He stood there for a second, with the door open, just looking at her. This whole entire world sleeping in a booster seat with chocolate on her shirt. He had no idea, none at all, that 4 feet across a lunch table that morning, a woman with everything and no one had watched him make one small joke and decided right then that she was going to find her way into this. He had no idea that his ordinary life was about to change in ways he could never have braced for. He had no idea that the loneliest woman in America was at that very moment sitting in the back of a black car with a phone in her hand, looking up the name Whitaker. All he knew was that his daughter was safe and asleep and loved. For Logan Whitaker right then, that was the whole world. That was everything. He closed the door as softly as he could, walked around to the driver's seat, and drove them home into the gold of the late afternoon light, The same light, though he didn't think of it, that had been shining in that photograph. The same light that a stranger 4 feet away had stared at like it was the only warm thing in a cold, cold room. And somewhere behind them, that black car was already turning around. The black car did turn around, but not that day. Victoria Caldwell had built an empire on a single principle. She never acted on impulse where money was involved, and she never wasted time where it wasn't. So she sat in the back of that car for the entire 40-minute drive back to the airfield with her assistant chattering about the next quarter's projections. And she said nothing, and she looked out the window at the gray Virginia sky. And she turned the name over in her mind like a stone she couldn't put down. Whitaker. Ms. Caldwell. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Priya, who'd been with her 4 years, leaned forward. "You've been quiet. Did the event not go well?" Because if the Admiral said something, the event went fine. The photographers got the shots we needed. The press release is drafted. I can have it out by 5 if you want to review. Priya. Yes. The chief who sat across from me at lunch. Older. Dark hair. Quiet. Victoria didn't turn from the window. Get me his file. Priya blinked. His file. His name is Whitaker. He's stationed at the base we just left. I want to know who he is. She finally turned. Not for anything strategic. Just get it. Priya had learned a long time ago not to ask Victoria Caldwell why. She simply nodded and made a note on her tablet, though privately she filed the request under the growing list of things about her boss that she did not understand and had stopped trying to. By the time the jet leveled off at 40,000 feet, Priya had a single-page summary. She handed it over without comment. Victoria read it twice. Logan Whitaker, 34 years old, Chief Petty Officer, 8 years of service, 2 commendations, an exemplary record. Widower. 1 dependent, a daughter 7. Wife deceased 6 years prior. There wasn't much else. A man's whole life reduced to a paragraph, and yet Victoria felt she'd learned more about him from that curling drugstore photograph than from any file. She set the page down on the little polished table in front of her and stared at nothing for a long time. Priya, she said finally. How old would Chloe be now? Priya went very still. In 4 years of working for Victoria Caldwell, she had never once heard that name spoken aloud. She knew it existed. Everyone who worked closely with Victoria knew it existed. The way you know a locked room exists in a house you've lived in for years, you never open it, you never mention it. You walk past the door and pretend it's a wall. I'm not sure I should. She'd be 26, Victoria said, answering her own question, her voice flat and even. 26 in March. She turned back to the window. That'll be all for now. Thank you. Priya gathered her tablet and retreated to the front of the cabin, and Victoria Caldwell sat alone in a leather seat that cost more than most people's cars 35,000 feet above the country she'd conquered, and thought about a little girl screaming with joy on her father's back in the golden light, and about another little girl a long time ago who used to run to the door when Victoria came home, back when Victoria still came home, before the coming home stopped and the deals never did. Damatusa. It was 9 days before Logan heard anything. He'd nearly forgotten it. Nearly. The joke had made the rounds of the base and been retold and finally worn out the way jokes do. And by the middle of the second week, nobody was talking about Victoria Caldwell anymore. Logan had gone back to his life the 5 a.m. alarms that never rang, the crooked braids, the endless negotiation over which cereal was acceptable this week. The 6th anniversary of Emily's death had come and gone. He'd taken Sophie to the cemetery the way he did every year, and they'd sat on the grass, and Sophie had told her mother, whom she couldn't remember, all about the worm on her desk, and the gold star, and the fancy suit lady who liked their beach picture. Logan had listened and said nothing, and let the wind do the crying he wouldn't let himself do. Then on a Thursday his CO called him in. Commander Reeves was not a man who wasted words. Chief, sit down. Logan sat. Sir? You remember the Caldwell event couple weeks back? Something cold moved in Logan's stomach. Yes, sir. You say something to her. Here it comes, Logan thought. He'd said a stupid thing to a billionaire in front of the Admiral. Of course, it had come back around. Rich people had long memories and longer reach. I made a joke, sir, at lunch. If it caused any... Relax, Whitaker. Reeves almost smiled, which for Reeves was a seismic event. You're not in trouble. Opposite, actually. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. Caldwell's office reached out, to the base, asking about you, specifically. Logan looked at the paper. It was a printed email brief and formal from an assistant named Priya Sharma. It requested on behalf of Ms. Victoria Caldwell a meeting with Chief Petty Officer Logan Whitaker at his earliest convenience at the Caldwell Industries headquarters in the city. It said the matter was personal, not professional, and that Ms. Caldwell would consider it a courtesy. Logan read it twice. I don't understand, sir. Neither do I, Chief, but when a woman worth $11 billion asks for a courtesy, the Navy tends to grant it. Reeves leaned back. You're cleared to go. Take the afternoon. Wear your civvies or your uniform, I don't care. Just don't embarrass the branch. Sir, what does she want with me? I have no idea, Reeves said. But if you want my advice and you don't, but I'm giving it anyway, you go find out. People like that don't come looking for people like us for no reason. Could be nothing. Could be the best thing that ever happened to you. He shrugged. Or the strangest. Dismissed, Chief. Logan stood and saluted and walked out with the printed email in his hand, feeling like a man who'd been handed a package he hadn't ordered and couldn't return. That night, after Sophie was asleep, he stood in the kitchen and called Dale. She what? Dale said. Her office asked for a meeting. Personal, it said, not business. Personal. Dale let out a low whistle. Whitaker, my man, do you understand what's happening here? No, Dale, that's why I'm calling you. The richest woman in America looked at your ugly mug across a lunch table and got a thing. A crush. She got a crush on the sad Navy dad. That's insane. Is it though? You saw how she looked at you. You told me yourself. She didn't laugh. She stared. She stared at Sophie's picture. Yeah, and who's in the picture with Sophie, you genius? Dale was clearly enjoying this far too much. Man, this is a Hallmark movie. This is a Lifetime special. Struggling single dad, lonely billionaire. Stop it. I'm just saying. Dale, I'm not... Logan pressed his fingers against his eyes. I've got a kid. I've got a job. I don't have the first idea what a woman like that could want with me, and I'm not going to sit here and let you turn it into some fantasy. It's probably nothing. Probably she wants to write a check to some Navy charity and put my face on it. Photo op. That's all. There was a pause on the line. When Dale spoke again, his voice had lost the teasing edge. Maybe, he said. But you're gonna go find out, right? Logan looked down the dark hall toward Sophie's door. Yeah, he said. I'm gonna go find out. Caldwell Industries occupied the top 11 floors of the tallest building in the city, and Logan felt every inch of the distance from the lobby to the executive suite. He'd worn his uniform. It had seemed safer, somehow armor made of the one thing in his life he was sure of. In the mirrored elevator, he watched himself rise past floor after floor of glass and steel and money, and he thought about the small house near the base with the drawings on the refrigerator. And he wondered what in God's name he was doing here. The elevator opened onto a floor that was quieter than a church. Priya Sharma was waiting for him. Chief Whitaker, thank you for coming. She's expecting you. Priya looked at him with open, unguarded curiosity, as though he were a puzzle she'd been trying to solve for 2 weeks. Can I get you anything, coffee, water? I'm fine, thank you. This way. She led him down a corridor that seemed to go on forever past art, that Logan was fairly sure was worth more than his life, and stopped at a set of doors at the very end. She knocked once, opened them, and stepped back. Chief Whitaker for you, Ms. Caldwell. And then Logan was standing in an office bigger than his entire house, with a wall of windows looking out over the whole city, and Victoria Caldwell was rising from behind a desk to meet him, and for the first time the Polish was gone. She wasn't in the sharp charcoal suit. She was in something simpler, softer, and she looked— Logan thought less like a magazine cover and more like a person. "Chief Whitaker," she said. "Thank you for coming. I know this is strange." "It's a little strange, ma'am." "Yes." "Please, sit." She gestured to a pair of chairs by the window, away from the desk, away from the trappings of power. "And you can stop calling me ma'am. It's Victoria." Logan sat, though he perched on the edge of the chair like a man ready to bolt. "All right, Victoria." The name felt strange in his mouth. "I have to be honest with you. I don't know why I'm here. My CO said it was personal, not business. And I've been trying to figure out for 2 days what a personal matter between you and me could possibly be." Victoria sat across from him. She was quiet for a moment, and Logan watched her gather herself, watched her decide something. "I owe you an apology first," she said. For what I said at that lunch. It was inappropriate. I said something to you. I wish I had a happy family like yours, and I put you in a terrible position in front of your colleagues. You handled it gracefully. You made a joke and let everyone off the hook. That was kind of you." She looked at her hands. "But I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks, and I realized I never should have said it in the first place. It wasn't fair to you." Logan studied her. This was not what he'd expected. He'd expected a check, a photo op, a request. He had not expected an apology from a woman who, as far as he could tell, had never apologized for anything in her life. "You don't owe me an apology," he said slowly. "It was just a thing people say." "No." Victoria shook her head. "It wasn't. That's the thing. It wasn't just a thing people say. I meant it." She looked up at him, and there it was again, that loneliness, naked now, not hidden behind any smile. "I looked at that picture of you and your daughter, and I meant every word of it, and it terrified me because I haven't wanted anything I couldn't buy in 20 years. The room was very quiet. Somewhere far below, the city hummed. "Victoria," Logan said carefully, "I think you've got the wrong idea about us, about my family. We're not some picture-perfect thing. It's a small house. It's an old truck. I burn dinner half the time. I do my daughter's hair off a YouTube video, and it comes out crooked every single day. Whatever you think you saw in that photo, I saw a father who did his daughter's hair." Victoria said. "That's what I saw. A man who gets up before dawn and braids a little girl's hair badly every single day, and shows up to a formal event with a drugstore photograph propped against his coffee cup because he can't stand to be in a room without her face in it." Her voice caught just slightly. "You have no idea what that's worth. You have it so you can't see it. But I promise you, Chief Whitaker, it is worth more than every single thing in this building." Logan didn't know what to say, so he said nothing and let her keep going because he could see now that she needed to. "You asked why you're here," Victoria said. "The truth is, I almost didn't do this. I've started this email to your commander a dozen times and deleted it a dozen times because it makes no sense, and I don't do things that make no sense. But I couldn't stop thinking about that lunch, about the way you talked about her, Sophie." She said the name carefully, like it was something breakable. "And I realized I don't even know how to say this without sounding insane, I wanted to know about her, about what your life is like, about how you did it, because She stopped. Her jaw tightened. Logan watched a woman worth $11 billion fight a battle behind her own face and for a moment lose. "Because I had a daughter too," she said. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Logan went still. "Had," he said very gently. "No, she's not. She's alive." Victoria's hands were knotted together in her lap now, white at the knuckles. "That's the thing. She's alive. She's 25 years old, and she's alive, and she lives in Seattle, and she has not spoken to me in 6 years." She let out a breath that shook on the way out. "So when I say I wish I had a family like yours, I don't mean I wish I'd had children. I had a child. I mean I wish I'd been the kind of parent you are. I wish I'd done your daughter's hair. I wish I'd shown up." Her voice broke fully now, and she looked away toward the windows, toward the city, toward anything but him. I wish I'd been there. Logan sat with that for a long moment. He'd walked into this office braced for a stranger to ask something of him. He had not been braced for this, for the loneliest-looking woman he'd ever met, to open the locked room in the middle of her life and show him what was inside. What happened? He asked quietly. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it, only something raw. What happened is exactly what you'd think happened. I built a company. I built this. She gestured at the office, the windows, the empire. And every year it got bigger, and every year I gave it more of myself until there was nothing left over. Her name is Chloe. I missed her first steps because I was in Tokyo. I missed her 6th birthday because a deal was closing. I missed her school play. She was the lead she'd practiced for months. She wanted me in the front row, and I missed it because I told myself the meeting mattered more, that there would be other plays. Her voice was very quiet now. There weren't other plays. That was the last one she ever did. She stopped inviting me to things after that. Smart girl. Learned not to expect me. By the time she was in high school, we were strangers who shared a last name. And by the time she left for college, she was gone, and I told myself she'd come around, that she'd understand someday, that she'd see everything I'd built was for her. Was it? Logan asked. Not unkindly, just honestly. Victoria looked at him, and the honesty of the question seemed to reach something in her that all her own years of self-justification never had. No, she said finally. No, I told myself it was for her, but it was for me. It was always for me. She was the story I told myself so I could keep doing the thing I actually wanted to do, which was win. And I won. I won everything. She looked around the enormous silent office. And now I sit up here and I win some more. And every night I go home to a house with 9 bedrooms, and I eat dinner alone, and my daughter blocks my number, and I would give Chief Whitaker. I swear to you, I would give every single dollar of it, all of it, the whole 11 billion, to have one morning where I get to make a crooked braid. The silence after that was enormous. Logan Whitaker looked at this woman across from him, and something in his chest that had been braced and guarded since the moment he walked into the building quietly came loose. Because he knew this. Not the money, he'd never know the money, but the loneliness. The empty house. The dinner alone. The specific, unbearable weight of loving someone who isn't there anymore. He knew all of it. He carried a different version of the exact same thing every single day of his life. I lost my wife 6 years ago, he said. He hadn't planned to say it. It just came out the way true things do when someone else goes first. Emily. She had a headache one morning. Said it was nothing. Took some Tylenol and went to lie down. He looked at his own hands now. I was at sea, 1,200 miles out. They called me on a satellite phone at 2 in the morning and told me she was gone. Aneurysm. Nothing anybody could have done. She was 31. He swallowed. Sophie was 1. Didn't even understand what was happening. She just knew Mama wasn't coming back, and she'd cry for her, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to be a mother and a father and a sailor all at once. Everybody told me I couldn't. Told me to get out of the Navy. Told me Sophie needed a woman in the house. Told me I was going to ruin her. He looked up. So, when you say you'd give it all for one crooked braid, I understand that. I do. Because there were nights those first couple years when I'd have given anything just to have one more ordinary day with Emily. One boring Tuesday. That's all I wanted. Just one more nothing day. Victoria was crying now silently, the tears just running. No sound. The crying of someone who'd taught herself decades ago never to make noise about her pain. How did you keep going? Sophie, Logan said simply. She needed me. There wasn't a choice. When somebody that small needs you, you don't get to fall apart. You get up. 5 a.m. You make the toast. You do the hair even when you're doing it through tears, even when you're so tired you can't see straight. You do it because she's there and she's yours, and being present for her is the only thing that gets you through the day. He held her gaze. That's the difference, Victoria. That's the whole difference between us. It's not the money. It's that when I lost everything, I still had a reason to get up. And you had everything, and no reason at all. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. That's the cruelest thing anyone's ever said to me, she whispered. And it's the truest. I didn't mean it cruel. I know you didn't. That's why it's true. She wiped her eyes almost angrily, the way a proud person does when they've been caught feeling something. Everyone I know lies to me. Do you understand that? Everyone. They tell me I'm brilliant. They tell me I built something incredible. They tell me Chloe will come around. They tell me I did the best I could. And they're lying, all of them, because I sign their paychecks, or I hold their contracts, or they want something from me. You're the first person in. I don't even know how long the first person to just tell me the truth. That I wasn't there. That it was my fault. That I did it to myself. She let out a shaky breath. It's a strange thing to be grateful for. But I am. Logan didn't know what to say to that, so he said the thing he actually felt. It's not too late, you know. She looked at him sharply. What? Chloe, your daughter. She's 25, not gone. You said it yourself, she's alive. She's in Seattle. That's not nothing, Victoria. That's a whole entire person still out there, still able to pick up a phone. He leaned forward. My Emily's gone. I don't get to fix anything with her. All I get is the promise I made and a grave I visit. But you've still got a living daughter. That's not a tragedy, that's a chance. Do you have any idea how many people would trade places with you in a heartbeat? Victoria stared at him. It was clear that no one had ever put it to her quite like that. That in all her years of grief and guilt, she'd been mourning Chloe as though the girl were dead, when in fact, she was one honest phone call away. She won't answer, Victoria said. I've tried. She blocked me. Then you find another way. You write a letter, you show up. You don't take one no from a hurt kid as the final word, you know, that you don't take no for an answer in your whole entire life. It's how you built all this. He gestured at the office. You fought for everything in this building. Fight for the one thing in it that actually matters. For a long moment, Victoria Caldwell, one of the most powerful people in the country, simply looked at a Navy chief in a slightly worn uniform, as though he had reached inside her chest and rearranged something she'd assumed was permanent. You're a strange man, Chief Whitaker, she said at last, and there was almost a smile in it. I've been told. I asked you here because I wanted to understand how you did it, how you raised her alone. I thought maybe if I understood, it would, I don't know, help somehow, fill something in. She shook her head slowly. But that's not what happened. What happened is, you just held up a mirror and made me look at my whole life. I'm not sure whether to thank you or throw you out. You can do both, Logan said. I'm easy. And that finally got a real laugh out of her. Not the switch-on, switch-off smile from the lunch. An actual laugh surprised out of her that briefly took 10 years off her face. Logan found himself smiling back, and for a strange, suspended moment, the enormous office didn't feel so cold, and the two loneliest people in it were just for a second not quite so alone. Then Victoria straightened, wiped her eyes one last time, and the composure came back over her like a tide, but softer now, less like armor. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to feel completely free to say no. All right. Tell me about her. About Sophie. Not the file version, I have the file version. Tell me the real version. What's she like? What makes her laugh? What's her favorite book? I want. Victoria's voice softened. I've spent 20 years talking about contracts and quarterly earnings and market share. I would very much like for one afternoon to just hear about a 7-year-old girl who thinks worms aren't our friends. Logan blinked. How'd you know about the worms? You mentioned it at lunch, that she screamed when a boy put a worm on her desk. Victoria almost smiled again. I remember everything you said at that lunch. It's the only conversation I've had in 2 years that I actually wanted to remember. And so Logan told her. He didn't quite know why this near stranger, this billionaire, this woman whose world could not have been more different from his. But she asked, and she'd shown him the locked room inside her own life, so it felt only fair. He told her about Sophie, about how she reorganized the whole kitchen when she was bored, and he'd found the spatulas in the sock drawer. About how her favorite book was a battered picture book about a lighthouse that they'd read 400 times, and she knew every word and still made him read it. About the gold star she'd gotten in math and carried around crumpled in her fist all day. About how she still had a bad dream about a whale sometimes, and how he'd told her the house was a submarine so nothing could get in. About the beach the day that photograph was taken, how she'd laughed so hard she got the hiccups and they'd had to sit in the sand for 20 minutes until they went away. And Victoria Caldwell listened. She listened the way a starving person eats completely gratefully without once interrupting. She who spent her days half-hearing people while she read 3 other things gave a Navy chief her entire undivided attention for the better part of an hour while he talked about a little girl she'd never met. And somewhere in the middle of it, without either of them quite noticing when it happened, the meeting stopped being strange and became something else. 2 people at a window high above a city, talking about the children they'd loved and lost in different ways, one to death, one to distance, and finding in each other the first person in a very long time who understood. When Logan finally stood to go hours later, the light outside the windows had gone gold. "Thank you," Victoria said, walking him to the door. "For coming, for all of it. I know it made no sense." "It made a little sense," Logan said. By the end, she almost said something and stopped, and then said it anyway. "Would it be all right if I stayed in touch? I don't want anything from you. I want to be clear about that. This isn't about the base or a contract or any of that. For the first time all day, the Empire Builder looked uncertain, almost shy. "I haven't talked to anyone the way I talked to you today in a very long time. And I'd hate for it to only happen once." Logan looked at her. He thought about Sophie waiting at home. He thought about Dale's teasing and the base's gossip and how completely insane this entire day had been. And he thought about the loneliest-looking woman he'd ever met, standing in a doorway, asking in her own careful way not to be alone. "Yeah," he said. "That'd be all right." Something eased in Victoria's face. "Good," she said. "Good. She caught herself before she could overthank him, before she could ruin it. "Drive safe, Chief Whitaker." "Logan," he said. "You can call me Logan." "Logan," she repeated, and this time the smile stayed. "Drive safe, Logan." He rode the elevator down 40 stories past all the glass and steel and money, and walked out into the golden evening, feeling like a man who'd gone in for one conversation and come out with something he didn't have a name for yet. In the truck before he pulled away, he sat for a minute and just looked at the enormous building rising up into the dark, all its windows lit, and somewhere at the very top, one lonely woman looking down. Then he drove home. To the school first, he'd arranged for Sophie to stay late with Emma's family, and when he pulled up, she came running, the way she always came running, and he caught her, the way he always caught her, and she smelled like crayons and juice and childhood, and Logan held on to her, maybe a little tighter than usual. "Daddy, you smell fancy," Sophie announced, wrinkling her nose. "Like the mall." "I went to a fancy building today, baby." "The fancy suit ladies building." Logan paused his hand on the truck door. "Yeah," he said slowly. "The fancy suit ladies building." "Was she nice this time?" He thought about a woman crying silently at a window, giving away the truth about her whole life to a stranger in a Navy uniform. He thought about the way she'd laughed, surprised, 10 years falling off her face. He thought about, "I'd hate for it to only happen once." "Yeah, baby," Logan said, buckling her in. "She was real nice." He had no way of knowing as he drove his daughter home through the last of the golden light that the strange afternoon he'd just spent 40 stories up was not an ending at all. That a woman who never took no for an answer had just decided quietly that Logan and Sophie Whitaker were going to matter to her. That the black car and the phone calls and the slow, careful entrance of Victoria Caldwell into their small, crooked life had only just begun. All he knew was that his daughter was buckled in safe beside him, chattering about her day, and that for the first time in a long time, he'd met someone who understood the exact shape of the hole that loss leaves behind. He didn't tell Sophie any of it. She was 7. There would be time. Instead, he turned up the radio and let her sing along off-key to a song she only half knew the words to, and drove them home to the small house with the drawings on the refrigerator and the crayon family with wings where the two of them had built out of nothing but stubbornness and love, the one thing an $11 billion empire could not buy. It began as these things do with small things. A text message 3 days later at 9 at night. "This is Victoria. Priya gave me your number. I hope that's all right. I just wanted to say thank you again. That was the best afternoon I've had in years." Logan had stared at it for a full minute before he answered, standing in his kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder, feeling absurdly like a teenager. "It was a good afternoon," he wrote back. Sophie says the fancy suit lady's building smelled like the mall. And then, because he couldn't help himself. That's a compliment coming from her. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "Tell Sophie the fancy suit lady says thank you. And that worms are in fact not our friends." Logan laughed out loud in his empty kitchen. That was how it started. Text messages that grew longer and less careful. She'd write him at odd hours, she seemed to never sleep, and he'd answer in the mornings before Sophie woke or in the stolen minutes at the base. She asked about his day. He asked about hers, though her days involved things he could barely comprehend, mergers and board fights and countries he'd never been to. But underneath all of it, the real conversation was always the same one they'd started at the window, 2 lonely people learning each other. "You're texting a lot lately," Dale observed one afternoon, catching Logan smiling at his phone by the coffee. "It's nothing." "That's her, isn't it? The billionaire." "Dale." "It's her." Dale grinned so wide Logan thought his face might split. "I told you, Hallmark movie. I called it. I want it on the record that I called it. We're friends, Dale, that's all. She went through something. She's lonely. So am I. We talk. That's the whole thing." "Uh-huh." Dale sipped his coffee, unconvinced and delighted. "You keep telling yourself that, Chief." But it was true, or at least Logan believed it was true. Because whatever was building between them was not the thing Dale imagined. It was quieter and stranger than that. Victoria had come into Logan's life like someone learning a language she'd never studied, and the language was ordinary life, and Logan was the only teacher she'd ever had who didn't want anything from her in return. The first time she came to the base to see him 3 weeks in, she came without an entourage, without a car service, driving herself in a modest rental, so as not to draw attention. She met him at a diner off the base, a place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been made during a previous administration. And she sat across from him in a plain sweater, and she looked, Logan thought, more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "You could have picked anywhere," Logan said. "You could have flown us both to Paris for lunch." "I've had lunch in Paris 100 times, Victoria said. "I've never had a patty melt in a vinyl booth with someone I actually wanted to talk to." She looked around at the shabby little diner with something like wonder. "This is better." And the strange thing was, Logan believed her. They talked for 3 hours. She told him she'd written the letter to Chloe, the one he'd pushed her toward that first afternoon at the window. She'd written it 11 times and thrown 10 of them away, and finally sent the 11th, a plain, honest letter that didn't defend anything or explain anything, that just said, "I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know it in my own words." She'd mailed it to Chloe's apartment in Seattle 2 weeks ago. She hadn't heard back. "She might not answer for a long time," Logan said gently. "She might not answer at all. You have to be ready for that." "I know. But you did the right thing, whether she answers or not. You told the truth. That's yours to keep, no matter what she does with it." Victoria turned her coffee cup slowly on the table. "You always do that," she said. "Do what?" Make me feel like the thing I'm terrified of might be survivable. She looked up. How do you do that? Practice, Logan said. I've survived a lot of things I was terrified of. It was Sophie in the end who changed everything, because Victoria could keep her distance from a man she'd met at a lunch, could keep it careful and adult and safe. But she could not keep her distance from the little girl in the photograph forever. She asked about Sophie constantly. She remembered every detail Logan told her, the lighthouse book, the whale dreams, the reorganized kitchen. And one evening, texting late, she wrote the thing she'd clearly been working up to for weeks. Would it be all right if I met her, only if you think it's a good idea? I understand completely if it isn't. Logan set the phone down and stood in his kitchen for a long time. This was the line. He knew it was the line. Texting a lonely billionaire was one thing that was his business, his life, his risk to take. But bringing someone into Sophie's world was something else entirely. Sophie had lost her mother. Sophie was careful with her heart in a way no 7-year-old should have to be. Logan had spent 6 years being ferociously protective of the small circle of people he let close to her. Because he knew that if someone came into that little girl's life and then left it, it would cut a wound in her that echoed the first one. He couldn't do that to her. He wouldn't. He picked the phone back up. I have to think about it, he wrote. She's been through a lot. I don't let just anybody in. I understand, Victoria wrote back immediately. That's exactly why I asked instead of just showing up. Take all the time you need. And Logan, if the answer is no, that's completely all right. I'd rather have you both in my life carefully than lose you by rushing. Logan read that 3 times. Then he called Dale. You're overthinking it, Dale said. I'm not overthinking it. I'm protecting my kid. You're doing both. Look, Whitaker, you've been talking to this woman for a month. She drives a rental car to a diner to see you. She wrote her estranged daughter a letter because you told her to. Does that sound like somebody who's gonna blow into Sophie's life for kicks and disappear? People leave, Dale. People I trusted have left. There was a pause. Dale knew what he meant. Dale had been there for all of it. Yeah, Dale said quietly. They do. But you can't put a wall around that kid so high nobody good ever gets in. Emily wouldn't have wanted that. You know she wouldn't. A beat. You do it slow. You do it careful. You do it on your terms in your house where you can watch. And the second it feels wrong, you pull the plug. But you at least let the woman meet her Logan. Come on. So Logan set the terms. Not a big outing. Not somewhere fancy that would overwhelm a 7-year-old or make her feel like a project. His house. Sunday afternoon. Low-key. And he sat Sophie down the night before, the way he sat her down for anything important, cross-legged on her bed, with the lighthouse book set aside. Baby, I want to tell you something. A friend of mine is going to come by tomorrow to meet you. Sophie looked up, instantly alert, the way she got when anything threatened to change the careful shape of their 2-person world. What friend? You remember the fancy suit lady from the building that smells like the mall? Sophie's eyes went wide. The rich lady. Her name's Victoria. And yeah, she's got a lot of money, but that's not why she's coming. She's coming because she's my friend and she really wanted to meet you. Logan chose his words carefully. She lost somebody too, baby. Somebody she loved, so she knows how it feels. I think that's part of why she and I are friends. Sophie considered this with the grave seriousness she brought to all important matters. Did her mommy go to heaven too? No, sweetheart, not her mommy. But she has a daughter, a grown-up daughter, and they don't talk anymore. It makes her sad. So she's kind of lonely, like... Logan stopped himself before he said, like us. She's kind of lonely. And I thought maybe we could be nice to her. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, with the devastating directness of a child. Are you gonna marry her? Logan nearly choked. What, no? No, baby, it's not. It's not like that. We're just friends, I promise. Nobody's marrying anybody. Okay. Sophie seemed satisfied, or at least willing to table the matter. Can I show her my Gold Star collection? You can show her anything you want. Even the whole collection. It's up to 17 now. Even all 17. Okay, Sophie said, and picked the lighthouse book back up, the crisis apparently resolved. And Logan sat there marveling the way he often did at how a 7-year-old could ask the single most terrifying question in the world and then move directly on to Gold Stars. Victoria arrived at 2 o'clock on Sunday, and Logan almost didn't recognize her. She'd left every trace of Caldwell Industries at home. Jeans, a soft cardigan, flat shoes, no jewelry except a plain watch. She stood on his front step, holding a gift bag, and looking for the first time since he'd known her genuinely nervous. A woman who negotiated with heads of industry frightened of a 7-year-old. I brought something, she said, holding up the bag. Is that all right? I didn't want to overdo it. Priya wanted me to bring a pony. I said absolutely not. It's just a book. A book's perfect, Logan said. Come in, and Victoria. He caught her arm gently as she stepped past. Just be yourself. Don't try too hard. Kids can smell trying too hard from a mile off. I have no idea how to be myself around a child, Victoria admitted. I never learned. I missed that whole part. You'll figure it out, Logan said. Same as I did. You just show up and pay attention. Sophie was waiting in the living room, sitting very upright on the couch in her best dress. She'd insisted on the best dress, with her Gold Star collection laid out beside her on a piece of construction paper. She stared at Victoria with open, unblinking evaluation. Logan held his breath. Victoria, to her enormous credit, did not do any of the things adults usually do wrong with children. She didn't crouch down and use a baby voice. She didn't gush. She didn't try to hug her. Instead, she stood a respectful distance away, and she looked at the construction paper covered in gold stars, and she said with what sounded like genuine astonishment, "Are those all yours?" Sophie nodded warily. 17. 17. Victoria let out a low whistle. The exact whistle Logan sometimes let out, and Sophie sat up a little straighter. I've closed deals worth $1 billion, and I have never once gotten a gold star. Not one. How do you get them? Math mostly, Sophie said. And one for reading, and one for being kind to Marcus, even though he put a worm on my desk. Marcus sounds like a menace. He is a menace, Sophie said with sudden feeling, and just like that, something cracked open. Because Victoria had said the magic word, she'd taken Sophie's side against the great enemy. Marcus and Sophie, who had been braced to dislike this stranger, found herself with an unexpected ally. Logan watched it happen from the doorway, and felt something in his chest go loose with relief. Victoria sat on the floor. In her cardigan and her nice flat shoes on Logan's old living room carpet, a woman worth $11 billion sat cross-legged on the floor, so she'd be at eye level with a 7-year-old, and she asked Sophie to tell her the story behind every single one of the 17 gold stars. And Sophie did. All 17. It took 25 minutes. Victoria listened to every word. She'd brought the lighthouse book, the exact one Logan realized with a jolt. The one he'd told her was Sophie's favorite, except brand new, unbattered, the cover crisp. Not to replace the old one. I heard yours was getting worn out, Victoria said, handing it over carefully. I thought maybe you could keep the old one for reading, and this one just for looking at. So the old one doesn't fall apart. And Sophie, who had a complicated and fierce relationship with that book, understood immediately the exact rightness of this, a reading copy and a keeping copy, and looked at Victoria with the first genuine warmth Logan had seen all afternoon. You knew it was my favorite, Sophie said. Your dad told me. He said you know every word. I do know every word. Prove it, Victoria said, and settled back against the couch. And Sophie, never one to turn down a dare, opened the old battered copy and read the entire thing out loud, cover to cover, in her careful 7-year-old voice, while a billionaire sat on the floor and listened, as though it were the most important document she'd ever been handed. Logan made coffee he didn't drink just so he'd have a reason to stand in the kitchen doorway and watch. By 4 o'clock, Sophie had shown Victoria the reorganized kitchen. Victoria pronounced the spatula in the sock drawer system efficient, the crayon drawings on the refrigerator, and the ultimate honor, the drawing of the crayon family with the third figure that had wings. Logan tensed when she brought that one over. It was sacred ground. He'd never once discussed that drawing with anyone. Sophie pointed at the winged figure matter-of-factly. "That's my mommy. She's in heaven, so I gave her wings." Victoria went very still. Logan, watching from the doorway, saw her take a breath before she spoke. Saw her choose her words with more care than she probably chose them in any boardroom on earth. "She's beautiful," Victoria said quietly. "I love that you gave her wings. I love that she's still in the picture." "Daddy says she's always in the picture," Sophie said, "even when we can't see her." "Your daddy," Victoria said, and her voice wasn't quite steady, "is a very wise man." And Sophie, 7 years old, looked at this sad rich lady sitting on her living room floor and did the thing that Logan would remember for the rest of his life, the thing that told him everything about the little girl he'd raised. She reached over and patted Victoria's hand, the way you comfort someone, and she said, "It's okay to be sad about your daughter. Daddy says being sad about somebody just means you love them a lot." Victoria Caldwell, who had not cried in front of another human being in 20 years until 3 weeks ago in her own office, put her hand over her mouth and cried on Logan Whitaker's living room floor, and a 7-year-old patted her shoulder and told her it was okay. Logan had to step back into the kitchen, so neither of them would see his face. When Victoria left that evening, Sophie hugged her goodbye, without being asked, a real hug, arms all the way around, and made her promise to come back and see the Gold Star collection when it hit 20. Victoria promised. She promised with the gravity of a woman signing a treaty. And in the doorway out of Sophie's earshot, she turned to Logan with her eyes still red and said the thing she'd been unable to say all afternoon. "I don't have the words," she said, "for what today was. I've spent 20 years being told I'm articulate, and I don't have a single word for what your daughter just did to me." "She likes you," Logan said. "That's not nothing. She doesn't like a lot of people." "She patted my hand." Victoria said it like it was impossible. "She told me it was okay to be sad. Nobody has told me it was okay to be sad since—" She stopped. "Since Chloe was small enough to do it." "Yeah," Logan said softly. "Kids are like that. They don't know they're supposed to be careful with hard things. They just walk right up to them." Victoria nodded and wiped her eyes and pulled her composure back around her shoulders like a coat. But something had changed in her face, something Logan had first glimpsed at that window 40 stories up and watched grow at the diner and seen bloom fully this afternoon on his living room floor. The loneliness wasn't gone, but it wasn't the only thing there anymore. "Can I come back?" she asked. And the CEO of Caldwell Industries, the woman who never asked permission for anything, asked it like a child. "Not for a while if that's too much. But can I come back?" "Victoria," Logan said. "You just got roped into a Gold Star collection with a 20-star quota. You don't have a choice anymore. You're in it now." She laughed that real laugh again, the one that took the years off, and for a moment, the two of them stood in the doorway of a small house near a naval base. A widowed sailor and a lonely billionaire. Both of them having lost something. Both of them improbably a little less alone than they'd been that morning. The visits became regular after that. Every other Sunday, then most Sundays. Victoria learned the rhythms of their small life, that Sophie needed her crusts cut off, that Logan burned dinner if he tried anything more ambitious than spaghetti, that the house went quiet at 7:30 for the Lighthouse book. She started arriving with groceries instead of gifts, having learned that Sophie preferred her doing things to buying things. She helped with homework. She sat through the Lighthouse book so many times she could recite it herself. She never once tried to be Sophie's mother. She was too careful, too aware of the winged figure on the refrigerator, too respectful of the sacred space where Emily lived. She just showed up, over and over. She just kept showing up. And Sophie, who had a child's unerring instinct for who was safe and who was not, began to call her something. Not Mom. Never. Mom and Victoria never asked for it, never wanted it, understood. It wasn't hers to have. But one Sunday, introducing Victoria to Emma from school, Sophie said it without thinking, the way children name the true shape of things. "This is Victoria. She's my special friend. My special friend." Victoria heard it, and Logan saw her hear it, and saw her have to look away toward the window for a second to keep her composure. Because a woman who had lost her own daughter to 20 years of never showing up had just been handed a title by another little girl. Not the title she'd lost. She could never get that one back. But a new one, freely given, earned the only way such things can be earned, by showing up and showing up and showing up again. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, Victoria lingered in the kitchen doorway before leaving the way she'd started to. "I got a letter today," she said quietly. Logan turned from the sink. From Chloe." Victoria's hands were trembling just slightly. "She wrote back. After 6 years in a letter I sent 2 months ago. She wrote back." She pulled a folded envelope from her bag and held it like it might dissolve. "I haven't opened it. I've had it in my bag since noon. I couldn't open it alone. I've opened every kind of letter there is alone, Logan, for 20 years, and this is the one I couldn't." She looked at him, and there was something naked and pleading in it. "Will you stay while I read it?" Logan dried his hands on the dish towel. "Of course I'll stay." She sat down at his small kitchen table under the drawings on the refrigerator in the house that had taught her how to show up, and with shaking hands she opened the letter from the daughter she'd lost. Logan sat across from her and didn't say a word. He just stayed. Because that was the whole thing he had to give, the only thing in the end that any of them had ever had to give each other. He stayed, and Victoria began to read. She read it out loud because Logan asked her to, not to be nosy, but because he could see she needed to hear the words in the air, instead of just in her own head where she'd spent 20 years telling herself lies. The letter was short. Chloe was not a woman inclined to give her mother more words than necessary. She'd learned economy from the same place Victoria had, but every line of it was a small, controlled explosion. She wrote that she'd received the letter. She wrote that she'd read it 8 times. She wrote that she didn't know if she believed it because she'd spent her whole childhood waiting for her mother to mean something and being disappointed, and she wasn't a child anymore and wasn't going to set herself up for it again. She wrote that she was not ready to see her and might never be. But then, at the very end, in a different pen, as though she'd added it later, after putting the letter down and picking it back up, she'd written one more line. "But it's the first time you ever said you were wrong, so I'm writing back. Don't make me regret it." Victoria's voice held steady until that last line, and then it broke apart completely, and she set the letter down on Logan's kitchen table and put her face in her hands and wept. Not the silent, disciplined crying he'd seen before, but the real thing, the kind that shakes a person's whole body, the kind that had been dammed up for 2 decades and finally found a crack. Logan didn't say anything wise. He didn't try to fix it. He got up and he came around the table and he put a hand on her shoulder, and he stood there while she cried the way he'd stood by Sophie's bed at 5 a.m. on 100 dark mornings, just present, just there, an anchor in the storm. "She wrote back," Victoria kept saying. "She wrote back. She wrote back. She wrote back," Logan agreed quietly. "That's the whole ball game, Victoria. That's the door opening. It's just a crack, but it's open. What do I do? What do I write? What if I say the wrong thing and she—" "You don't say the perfect thing," Logan said. "There's no perfect thing. You just say the true thing. You already found out that works. The true thing is what got you a letter back." He squeezed her shoulder. "You tell her you won't make her regret it. And then this is the hard part, you spend as long as it takes proving it. Same as you proved it to Sophie. You just keep showing up even when it's slow, even when she pushes back. You already know how to do this now. You learned it in this kitchen." Victoria looked up at him, her face wrecked and wet, and somehow younger than he'd ever seen it. "I learned it from a 7-year-old, she said. "Best teacher there is," Logan said. That letter changed something in Victoria. Logan could see it in the weeks that followed. She wrote Chloe back the very next day, and she showed Logan the draft first, sitting at his kitchen table, and it was good, it was honest, it made no demands. Chloe answered in 3 weeks, then 2. The letters were careful, wary, full of old scar tissue. But they were letters, and they kept coming, and slowly across a continent, a mother and a daughter began the long work of finding out if there was anything left to save. Victoria didn't push for a phone call. She'd learned patience the way she'd learned everything else in Logan's small house, by watching a father who never rushed a wounded child, who let Sophie come to hard things in her own time. And through all of it, she kept showing up on Sundays. The three of them had become, without anyone ever deciding it or naming it, a strange and genuine kind of family. Not the kind on a greeting card. Logan was clear with himself about that, and clear with Dale, who had long since given up teasing, and started just watching, with a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't romance, or if something like it was there underneath, neither of them touched it, because they both understood that what they'd built was more fragile and more important than that, and neither was willing to risk it. It was something without a good name in English. Victoria was Sophie's special friend. She was Logan's. Logan didn't have the word either. The person who understood. The person who stayed. The friend who'd walked into his life through the strangest door imaginable and made it bigger. Then came the deployment. Logan had known it was coming. He always knew months out the way, winter's coming, even in the warm part of fall. But knowing didn't make the telling easier. He sat Sophie down on her bed, the lighthouse book set aside, and he told her the way he always told her, straight and gentle. "Baby, I have to go away for a while. For work." Sophie's whole face changed. She was 7 now, old enough to understand what away for work meant, old enough to have counted the days on the last one. "How long?" "A few months. I don't know exactly. I never know exactly, you know that." "Who's gonna do my hair?" It came out small and scared, and it wasn't really about the hair. And they both knew it wasn't really about the hair. "Mrs. Dale's gonna help with that, and you're gonna stay with the Dales in their guest room like last time. You like the Dales." "I want to stay here." "I know, baby. But you can't stay here alone, and I have to go. It's my job. It's how I take care of us." He pulled her into his lap, too big for it now, but he did it anyway. "I'm gonna call you every single night I can. Same as always. And when I can't call, you know what I want you to do. Read the lighthouse book." Sophie mumbled into his chest. She knew the ritual. They'd done it before. "Read the lighthouse book. And know that wherever I am, I'm reading it too in my head, right along with you." He kissed the top of her head. "The house is still a submarine. Nothing gets in. And I always come back. Have I ever not come back? No. Have I ever once broken that promise? No. And I'm not going to start now. That's a Whitaker promise. And Whitakers don't break promises. Say it back to me." "Whitakers don't break promises," Sophie whispered. Victoria came to see them off the day before he shipped out. She and Sophie had a whole plan worked out. Victoria would come by the Dales every Sunday, same as always. Keep the Gold Star quota on track. Keep the lighthouse book going. She'd cleared it with the Dales, cleared it with Logan, arranged everything with the quiet, ruthless efficiency she brought to acquisitions. But standing in Logan's living room the night before he left, watching Sophie sleep on the couch, where she'd conked out mid-cartoon, Victoria's efficiency deserted her. "I don't like this," she admitted quietly. "Nobody likes it," Logan said. "It's the job." "What if something happens to you out there?" She said it fast, like she'd been holding it. "What happens to her? I know the Dales are wonderful. I know there are arrangements. I've read the paperwork. But Logan, what happens to her?" Logan was quiet for a moment. It was the question that lived under every deployment, the one no sailor with a child ever fully outran. "She'd be taken care of," he said. "There's a whole plan. Guardianship, the Navy benefits, all of it. She'd be okay." He looked at his sleeping daughter. "But you're not asking about the paperwork, are you?" "No," Victoria said. "I'm not." "You're asking who'd love her." Victoria didn't answer. She didn't have to. "Look at me," Logan said, and she did. "I'm coming back. I've done this a dozen times, and I've come back a dozen times, and I'm gonna come back this time. But if you're asking me if the worst thing happened, would I want you in her life? Victoria, you're already in her life. You're her special friend. That doesn't stop existing because I'm on a ship. You keep showing up, that's all. Just like you've been doing. That's the only promise I need from you. I'll be here every Sunday, Victoria said. Every single one. I'll close the whole company down before I miss one. You don't have to close the company down. I would, though, Victoria said, and Logan understood that she meant it, that this woman who had never once in 20 years chosen a person over the company would, for this little girl, burn the whole thing to the ground. And the understanding sat between them unspoken and enormous, one more thing without a name. He shipped out the next morning. The first weeks went the way they always went. Logan called when he could a crackling satellite line. Sophie's voice bright and desperate on the other end. The lighthouse book read across an ocean. Victoria came every Sunday as promised. She sent Logan photos through the family liaison. Sophie's newest gold star. Sophie missing a front tooth. Sophie and Victoria at the diner where Logan had had his patty. Melt the two of them, making identical silly faces. Logan taped the photos up in his rack on the ship and looked at them every night before he slept the way he'd once carried Sophie's picture propped against his coffee cup. Then in the 7th week the fever came. It started small. Sophie complaining of a headache, a temperature that the Dales treated with children's Tylenol and cool cloths, the ordinary machinery of a childhood cold. But it didn't break. It climbed. By the 2nd day, she couldn't keep food down, and her skin had gone hot and papery, and Ellen Dale, who had raised 3 children of her own and knew the difference between a cold and something wrong, looked at the little girl on the couch and felt the specific cold dread that only a caregiver knows. We're going to the hospital, Ellen said. Now. Victoria was in a board meeting when Priya slipped into the room. Victoria had left standing orders ones her entire staff had found baffling. Any call about a girl named Sophie Whitaker was to be put through immediately, no matter what she was doing, no matter who was in the room. Priya had never had to use the order. She used it now, crossing the boardroom in front of a dozen of the most powerful people in the industry and leaning down to whisper in Victoria's ear. Sophie's in the hospital. Ellen Dale just called. They don't know what's wrong yet. It's serious. Victoria stood up. She didn't excuse herself. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask to reschedule. She stood up in the middle of a meeting worth hundreds of millions of dollars in front of a board that had never once seen her prioritize anything over the company, and she said, "This meeting is over. Get out, all of you, now." "Victoria," said the chairman, a man who'd known her 20 years. "We're in the middle of—" "I said get out." Her voice cracked like a whip. "A child is in the hospital. I'm leaving. Priya, get the car. If any one of you has a problem with that, you can put it in writing, and I'll read it never." She was already moving, already grabbing her bag, already gone in her head. The deal can wait. She can't. And a woman who had missed her own daughter's last school play for a meeting exactly like this one walked out of the boardroom without looking back. She broke every speed limit between the office and the hospital. She left the car crooked across 2 spaces in the lot and didn't care. She ran through the emergency room doors in a suit worth more than a nurse's annual salary, and she grabbed the first person in scrubs she could find and said the words that 100 frightened parents said in that room every day. No different from any of them. All her billions meaning exactly nothing. Sophie Whitaker. A little girl 7 years old. They just brought her in. Where is she? Please, where is she? They wouldn't let her back at first. She wasn't family. She wasn't on any form. She was, as far as the hospital's records were concerned, no one a stranger claiming a connection to a child. And Victoria Caldwell, who could buy the hospital, who could buy the whole block. The hospital sat on, stood at that desk utterly powerless, because the one thing her money could not do was make her Sophie's mother on a piece of paper. It was Ellen Dale who saved it coming out to the waiting room and finding Victoria arguing desperately with a nurse. "She's with me," Ellen told the desk. "She's family. Whatever the form says, let her back." And the nurse, seeing the look on both women's faces, made the small human decision to bend the rule and let Victoria through. Sophie was small in the hospital bed. That was the thing that undid Victoria completely. How small she looked, swallowed up by the white sheets and the machines, an IV taped to the back of one little hand, her face flushed and her eyes glassy with fever. She'd never looked 7 before. She'd always seemed older, sharper, more herself. Now she just looked like a very sick little girl, and Victoria's knees nearly went out from under her. "Victoria." Sophie's voice was thin and dry. "You came?" "Of course I came." Victoria was at the bedside, instantly taking the small hot hand, carefully mindful of the IV. "Of course I came, sweetheart. Where else would I be?" "You were in a meeting," Mrs. Dale said. "An important one." "There is no meeting more important than you," Victoria said, and she meant it with a completeness that shook her, because it was the truest thing she'd said in 20 years, and it had taken her 60 years and 2 daughters to learn it. "There is nothing in the whole world more important than you. Do you understand me? Nothing." The doctors came and went. It was a severe infection. They used a long word. Victoria made them repeat twice that had moved faster than anyone expected, the kind of thing that was frightening but treatable, that would be fine with the right antibiotics and time and watching, but that in the first uncertain hours before the medicine took hold was serious enough that no one would promise her anything. And Victoria, who had spent her whole life extracting promises and guarantees and signed assurances from everyone she dealt with, learned what every parent eventually learns in a room like that. That there are things you cannot negotiate, cannot buy, cannot control, that you can only sit beside and pray over and refuse to leave. So she refused to leave. She called the ship. It took hours and a dozen favors and every ounce of her considerable power. But she got a message to Logan's command, and she got Logan a call home, and when his voice finally came crackling down the line, she was standing in the hospital hallway, gripping the phone with both hands. "Logan, it's me. It's Victoria. Victoria." His voice sharpened instantly with fear she was the last person who'd call him on this line. "What's wrong? What happened? Is it Sophie?" "She's in the hospital. She's got an infection. It's serious, Logan. But the doctors say she'll be okay. They think she'll be okay, but she's very sick, and I needed you to hear it from someone who's here, someone who's with her, so you'd know she's not alone. She is not alone. I'm here. I haven't left. I'm not going to leave." There was a silence on the line so long she thought the connection had dropped. Then Logan's voice came back, and it was the voice of a man being torn in half, a father 1,200 miles from his sick child, with an ocean he could not cross. "I can't get back," he said, and his voice cracked on it. "I put in for emergency leave the 2nd, but it's gonna take days, Victoria days, the logistics out here. I can't get to her. My baby's in a hospital bed and I can't get to her." He made a sound Victoria had never heard from him, this steady anchor of a man, this sound of pure helplessness. "She's gonna wake up and I won't be there. For the first time in her whole life I won't be there. You listen to me, Logan Whitaker." Victoria's voice was fierce now, fierce as it had ever been in any boardroom, but aimed for the first time at something that actually mattered. "You are not going to fall apart on that ship. You have a job to do, and men who depend on you, and you're going to do it, and you're going to trust me. Because I am going to be everything she needs until you get home. I'm going to sit in this chair, and I'm not going to move. I'm going to read her the Lighthouse book. I know every word, I know every word. And when she wakes up, scared, mine is going to be the face she sees, and I'm going to tell her that her daddy is coming, that the house is still a submarine, that nothing gets in all of it, every word of it exactly the way you'd say it. She will not be alone for one single second. I swear it to you. I swear it on my own life. Do you believe me?" Logan was crying now. She could hear it 1,200 miles away, this man who never let himself cry. "I believe you," he said. "God help me, Victoria, I believe you. Take care of my baby, please. Take care of her till I can get there." "With everything I have," Victoria said. "With everything I am. Now go do your job, sailor, and come home to us." She went back into the room. She pulled the chair as close to the bed as it would go. And Victoria Caldwell, who had missed a lifetime of bedsides, who had chosen 1,000 meetings over 1,000 moments exactly like this one, sat down beside a sick child, and did not get up. She read the lighthouse book. She'd been telling the truth. She knew every word worn into her from all those Sundays, and she read it in a low, steady voice to a feverish little girl who drifted in and out of sleep. When Sophie stirred and whimpered, Victoria was there. When the fever spiked in the small dark hours and Sophie cried out for her daddy, Victoria held her hand and told her the truth. "Daddy's coming, baby. He's on his way. He's crossing the whole ocean to get to you. And until he does, I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." When the nurses came to change the IV, and Sophie was frightened of the needle, Victoria told her to squeeze her hand as hard as she could, and Sophie did, and Victoria didn't so much as flinch, though the small nails dug in, because a little pain in her hand was less than nothing was a gift compared to the 20 years she'd spent feeling nothing at all. She did not sleep. Priya brought her coffee and a change of clothes and offered to spell her so she could rest, and Victoria said no. Ellen Dale offered to take the night shift, and Victoria said no. "You've done more than enough, Ellen, and I'll never be able to thank you for getting her here. But this chair is mine now. I'm not giving it up." And Ellen, who understood something about the woman she was looking at, who could see this, was about far more than one sick child, squeezed Victoria's shoulder and let her keep the chair. On the third day, the fever broke. It broke the way these things break quietly, undramatically, a nurse noting the temperature and giving a small nod, the numbers finally moving the right direction. Sophie woke that afternoon clear-eyed for the first time in days, weak and hungry, and herself again. And the first thing she saw was Victoria in the chair, rumpled and exhausted and unmoved, exactly where she'd been every time Sophie had surfaced from the fever. "You're still here," Sophie said. "I'm still here." "Did you leave even once?" "Not once," Victoria said. "I told your daddy I wouldn't, and I don't break promises. That's a Whitaker rule. I've adopted it." Sophie smiled, weak but real. "You're not a Whitaker." "No," Victoria agreed softly. "But I'm your special friend, and special friends don't break promises either." Logan made it home on the fourth day. He came straight from the airfield, still in his uniform, having crossed half the planet on emergency leave, running on no sleep and pure terror, and he burst through the door of the hospital room like a man storming a beach. And what he saw stopped him cold in the doorway. Sophie awake, sitting up, color back in her cheeks, the lighthouse book open in her lap, and beside her in a chair, pulled as close as a chair could go, holding his daughter's hand and reading to her in a voice gone rough from days of use, was Victoria Caldwell. The woman who ran an empire, the woman who'd missed her own child's whole life. Sitting in a plastic hospital chair in clothes she'd worn for 4 days, holding a little girl's hand, reading her a picture book about a lighthouse. She looked up and saw him in the doorway. Neither of them said anything for a moment. There wasn't anything to say. Everything that needed saying was in the room already, in the chair pulled close in the open book in the 4 days she had not left. "Daddy." Sophie's whole face lit up, and she reached for him, and Logan crossed the room in 2 strides and gathered her up as gently as he could, mindful of the IV, and buried his face in her hair, and held on this man who never fell apart, falling apart, at last silently, his shoulders shaking, his daughter safe in his arms. "I'm okay, Daddy," Sophie said, patting his back the way she patted everyone who was sad, this child who comforted the whole world. "I'm okay. Victoria took care of me. She never left, not even once." Logan lifted his head and looked at Victoria over his daughter's shoulder, and the look on his face was something beyond gratitude, beyond words, beyond anything the English language had a container for. And Victoria looked back at him, exhausted and wrecked, and somehow more whole than he'd ever seen her, and she understood the look, and she gave a small nod because there was nothing to say. She had done the thing, the one thing she'd failed to do her whole life, the thing she'd have given every dollar of 11 billion to go back and do for Chloe. She had stayed. When it mattered most, when a child was sick and frightened, and her own father couldn't reach her, Victoria Caldwell had stayed. Later in the hallway, while Sophie dozed and a nurse checked her vitals, Logan found Victoria slumped against the wall, finally letting the exhaustion take her, now that he was here to hold the line. "You didn't leave," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the whole world in 3 words. "I couldn't," Victoria said simply. I tried to imagine leaving, and I couldn't make the thought hold." She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and honest. "I understand it now, Logan. What you told me that first day at the window. About how when someone that small needs you, you don't get to fall apart, you just get up. I never understood it before. I thought I did. I didn't." She laughed a small broken sound. "I understand it now. I understand the whole thing now. It only took me 60 years and a hospital chair." Logan slid down the wall to sit beside her, both of them on the floor of a hospital hallway. Two exhausted people who had between them exactly one healthy child and a whole ocean of things they'd lost. "You know what you did in there," he said quietly. "You didn't just take care of Sophie. You gave yourself the thing you never got with Chloe. You showed yourself you could do it, that you're not the person who leaves. Not anymore." He nudged her shoulder with his. "That was always the real question, wasn't it? Not whether Chloe could forgive you, whether you could believe you'd changed." Victoria was quiet for a long time. "I'm flying to Seattle," she said finally. "When Sophie's out of the woods, when you're back on your feet with her. I'm not going to write another letter. I'm going to get on a plane, and I'm going to go stand in front of my daughter, and if she slams the door in my face, then she slams the door in my face. But I'm going to show up, in person. For once in my life, I'm going to be a mother who actually shows up at the door." She turned to look at him. "Because I finally know I can do it. I did it for 4 days in that chair. Turns out, I had it in me the whole time. I just never spent it on the people who mattered." Logan smiled, tired and proud. "That's the whole thing, Victoria. That's the whole entire thing right there, showing up at the door." "I learned it from a 7-year-old, Victoria said for the second time. "Best teacher there is," Logan said for the second time, and this time when he said it, both of them were crying, and neither of them cared. And down the hall, a little girl slept safe. And healing watched over at last by two people who had each in their own broken way learned the only lesson that had ever really mattered. That love isn't the thing you feel, it's the thing you do over and over by simply refusing to leave the room. Sophie came home from the hospital on a Tuesday, and Logan carried her over the threshold of the small house like she was made of glass, even though she insisted loudly that she could walk perfectly fine and wasn't a baby. Victoria followed with the bags. The three of them settled back into the house near the base, as though something had shifted in it. The same old furniture, the same drawings on the refrigerator, the same crayon family with wings. But the air itself felt different. The way a house feels different after everyone in it has nearly lost something and been given it back. Victoria kept her word about Seattle. She waited until Sophie was fully well, until Logan had used the rest of his emergency leave to get his daughter back on her feet, until the fear had drained out of the little house and been replaced by the ordinary rhythms. Again the 5 a.m. alarms that never rang, the crooked braids, the endless negotiation over cereal. And then on a gray morning 3 weeks later, she got on a plane. She didn't tell Chloe she was coming. She'd thought about it for a long time whether to warn her, and Logan had helped her think it through at the kitchen table over coffee. "If I call ahead, she'll tell me not to come," Victoria said. "She'll have every reason ready. She's smart. She'll talk me out of it before I ever get on the plane." "And if you don't call ahead, she might slam the door," Logan said. "Then she slams the door." Victoria wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "But she slams it on my actual face. She sees me standing there. She knows I got on a plane and crossed the whole country and stood at her door. Even if she never lets me in, she knows I came. That's the part I control. The showing up. The rest is hers." "That's the right call," Logan said. "That's exactly the right call." Sophie, who was doing homework at the same table and pretending not to listen, looked up. "Is Victoria going to see her sad daughter?" "Yes, baby," Victoria said. She'd stopped being surprised by how much the child absorbed. "I'm going to go try." "Are you scared?" Victoria considered lying, the way adults lie to children, to seem brave. Then she remembered where she'd learned better. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "More scared than I've ever been of anything." Sophie nodded, entirely unsurprised, and delivered her verdict with the total authority of a 7-year-old who had recently survived a hospital. "You should bring the Lighthouse book. When I'm scared, Daddy reads me the Lighthouse book, and then I'm not scared anymore. You could read it on the plane." Victoria looked at the little girl for a long moment. "You know what?" she said slowly. "I think I will." And she did. She flew across the country with a worn picture book about a lighthouse in her expensive bag, and somewhere over the middle of the country, 35,000 feet up, the same altitude at which she'd once sat alone, reading a file about a Navy chief. The same seat, the same silence. She took the book out and read it to herself, and thought about a little girl who'd nearly died and a chair she hadn't left, and she was not for once alone in that silence. She was full of it, full of all of them. Chloe lived in a modest apartment in a Seattle neighborhood that Victoria could have bought outright without noticing the dent. Victoria stood outside the building for 20 minutes before she could make herself go in. Then she climbed the stairs. She took the stairs she needed the time, and she stood in front of a door with her daughter's name on a little slip of paper by the buzzer, and she thought about turning around. She thought about it hard. And then she thought about a hospital chair, and about the fact that she had proven over 4 days that she was not the person who leaves. She knocked. There were footsteps. The door opened on a chain, and a face appeared in the gap, a woman of 25 with Victoria's own dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. And the face went white, then hard, then something complicated Victoria couldn't read. "Mom." Chloe's voice was disbelieving. What are you doing here? You can't just—" "I know," Victoria said quickly. "I know I can't just show up. I know I have no right. You don't have to let me in. You don't have to say anything. I just—" Her voice was shaking, and she let it shake. She didn't try to control it because control was the thing that had cost her everything. "I got on a plane, Chloe. I crossed the whole country. Because I've spent 20 years choosing meetings over you, and I wanted one time, just one time before it's too late, I wanted to be the mother who shows up at the door. So here I am, at your door, and you can close it. But I needed you to see that I came." Chloe stared at her through the gap in the chain. For a long, terrible moment, she didn't move. And Victoria was sure this was it. This was the door closing. And she'd told Logan she could survive that. And now she wasn't sure she could. Then Chloe's face crumpled just slightly, just at the edges the way a dam shows its first crack. And she said in a voice that was suddenly very young, "You look different." "I am different," Victoria said. "I know everyone says that. I know it's the oldest lie there is. But something happened to me, Chloe. A little girl happened to me, and her father. And I learned God. I learned so late. I learned 20 years too late. I learned what I should have known when you were small. And I can't get those years back. I can't. But I'm 60, not dead, and you're 25, not gone, and I thought—" She stopped. "I thought maybe that was still worth something. Coming to your door and saying it to your face." The chain slid back, the door opened, and Chloe Caldwell stood there in the doorway of her apartment, looking at the mother she hadn't seen in 6 years, and neither of them moved. And then Chloe said the thing that broke and remade the whole world. "You want some coffee?" I don't have anything fancy. It's just regular coffee." "Regular coffee," Victoria said, and her voice broke completely. "Sounds perfect." She called Logan that night from a hotel, and she was crying, but it was a different crying than he'd ever heard from her, and he knew before she said a word that the door had opened. "She let me in," Victoria said. "We talked for 4 hours. 4 hours, Logan. It was hard. It was so hard she said things I deserved to hear, and it hurt like nothing's ever hurt. But she let me in, and when I was leaving, she said maybe I could come back next month. She said maybe. And Logan, from her maybe is everything. Maybe is the whole sky. Maybe is the door open," Logan said, and he was grinning so hard Sophie asked him what was funny. "That's how it starts, Victoria. Just like that. One maybe at a time. It didn't happen all at once. Real things never do." Victoria flew to Seattle the next month, and the month after that, and slowly, across a whole year, across 100 careful conversations, across old wounds, reopened and cleaned, and finally allowed to heal, a mother and a daughter found their way back to something. Not what they'd lost. That was gone, and Victoria stopped pretending it wasn't. But something new. Something built the only way anything real gets built, by showing up and showing up and showing up again, until the showing up itself becomes a kind of love the other person can finally believe. And through all of it, the Sundays continued, because that was the thing about the strange family that had assembled itself in the small house near the base. It didn't dissolve when the crisis passed. It deepened. Victoria didn't disappear back into her empire once Sophie was well and Chloe was answering the phone. If anything, she came around more, not less, because she'd learned in that hospital chair what she'd never learned in 60 years of boardrooms, that the small ordinary hours were the only ones that ever actually counted. The Lighthouse book at 7:30. The Gold Star quota, which hit 20, and then 30, and then Sophie declared she'd retired the collection because she was too old for stars, which broke both their hearts a little. The diner with the patty melts and the terrible coffee. The crooked braids which Victoria eventually learned to do herself badly. Standing behind Sophie's chair on the Sundays, she stayed over, until one morning Sophie said, "You're worse at this than Daddy," and Victoria laughed so hard she had to sit down. The company, meanwhile, did not collapse without Victoria's every waking hour, which surprised no one but Victoria. She built the foundation she'd been thinking about since that first hospital call, a real one funded properly, aimed at exactly the thing she'd stumbled into: support for single parents in the military, for the fathers and mothers who served their country while raising children alone, who did crooked braids at 5 a.m. and carried drugstore photographs propped against their coffee cups. She named it after nobody. She refused to put her own name on it, which her board found baffling. When a reporter finally asked her at the foundation's launch why a woman famous for her ambition had suddenly poured herself into military single parents, Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Because I met one," she said. "A Navy chief raising his daughter alone. And I looked at his life and I said out loud in front of a table full of people that I wished I had a family like his. And he made a joke about it the way people do when something's too true to say straight. And it turned out that joke was the truest thing anyone ever said to me." She looked directly into the camera. "I spent my whole life believing success was the thing worth building. I was wrong. I built $1 billion company and went home to an empty house every night for 20 years. That man had a small house and an old truck and a daughter who thought worms weren't our friends, and he was richer than I ever was. It took me 60 years to understand that. This foundation is me trying to make sure other people understand it sooner. Success means nothing," she said, "if you have nobody to share it with. Nothing. I'd trade every dollar I ever made for the years I spent making them. But since I can't, I'm going to spend what's left making sure other people don't have to." The clip went everywhere. People who'd only ever known Victoria Caldwell as a face on a magazine cover watched a billionaire say on camera that her whole life had been a mistake she was trying to correct, and it moved something in them. Because everyone has a version of the same fear that they'll get to the end and find they spent it all on the wrong things. Logan watched the clip at his kitchen table with Sophie in his lap, and when it ended, Sophie said, "That's about us, Daddy. She's talking about us." "Yeah, baby," Logan said. "She is. Are we famous now?" "No." Logan laughed. "We're not famous, we're just us." "Good," said Sophie, who had firm opinions about everything. "I don't want to be famous, I want to be us." The years went on, the way years do, faster than anyone wants them to. Logan stayed in the Navy. He'd thought about getting out after the hospital scare, thought hard about it, but in the end, he stayed because it was who he was, and because now, for the first time since Emily died, he could deploy without that specific terror of what would happen to Sophie if the worst came. Because now there was Victoria. Now there was someone else who would never leave the room. He'd stand on the deck of a ship in the middle of the night, 1,200 miles from home, and instead of the old, crushing loneliness, he'd feel something steadier. The knowledge that his daughter was safe, was loved, was watched over by more than one pair of eyes. It was the thing he'd been told 6 years earlier that he couldn't give her: a family. He'd been told over and over that a single father couldn't build one, that a little girl needed a mother, that his career made it impossible. And he'd ignored every single voice and kept his promise to Emily and built one anyway. Not the way anyone predicted, not the way anyone would have designed it, but real and whole and theirs. Sophie grew. The little girl who'd screamed on her father's back in a golden photograph became a lanky 10-year-old, then a sharp-eyed 12-year-old, then a teenager with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubbornness, and Victoria's terrifying competence at getting exactly what she wanted. She never forgot. Her mother Logan made sure of that, kept Emily alive in stories, kept the winged figure on the refrigerator long after the other drawings had come and gone. But she grew up surrounded by people who loved her, which was the only thing Logan had ever asked of the whole wide world. The neighbors, the Dales, the sprawling improvised family of a naval community. And Victoria, who was never her mother and never tried to be, but who was unshakably permanently her special friend, the woman who'd sat in a hospital chair for 4 days and never left a fact. Sophie carried with her whole life like a stone in her pocket. Proof that she was the kind of person people didn't leave. And Chloe. Chloe came into their lives too, eventually flew out from Seattle one Thanksgiving, wary and quiet, to meet the little girl and the Navy chief who had, in her own words, apparently performed a personality transplant on my mother. She and Sophie took to each other instantly. The older sister Sophie never had, and the younger sister Chloe had never known she wanted. And Chloe watched her mother move around Logan's small kitchen, cutting the crusts off toast and doing a crooked braid, and something in Chloe's face that had been clenched tight for 20 years finally slowly let go. "She's really different," Chloe said to Logan quietly out on the back porch, watching Victoria and Sophie through the window. "I didn't believe it, in the letters. I thought it was just words. People say they've changed." "She didn't change with words," Logan said. "She changed in a hospital chair, sat there 4 days and didn't leave. That's not words. That's the realest thing there is." Chloe was quiet for a moment. "She never did that for me," she said, and there was old pain in it, but less than there'd once been. Not once. Not for a fever, not for a broken arm, not for anything. "No," Logan said. He wouldn't lie to her. He'd learned that from Sophie, from Victoria, from the whole hard business of loving broken people. She didn't, and she'd give anything to go back and do it. She can't. Neither of you can get those years back. He turned to look at her. "But she's here now, and you're here now. And that's not nothing, Chloe. Take it from a man whose wife is in the ground. A living mother sitting in your childhood kitchen is not nothing." Chloe looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back through the window at her mother laughing at something Sophie had said, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and she said, "No, I guess it isn't." There came an evening years on when the four of them, Logan, Sophie, Victoria, and Chloe, out visiting again, sat together in the small backyard that had once needed repairs, and had long since gotten them watching the sun go down. Sophie was a teenager now, all long limbs and quick opinions, but she still sat close to her father, the way she had when she was small, her head against his shoulder. Victoria sat in a lawn chair with Chloe beside her, the two of them not touching, but near which, after everything, was its own kind of miracle. The sky went gold, and then rose, and then the deep blue of evening. "Victoria," Sophie said from against her father's shoulder. She was old enough now to ask real questions, and she asked this one gently. "Are you happy? Like actually happy? You've got everything now. Chloe's here, and us and the foundation. Are you happy?" Victoria didn't answer right away. She looked at Chloe sitting beside her, her grown daughter who'd let her back in one careful inch at a time. She looked at Logan, the man who'd held up a mirror to her whole life and made her look. She looked at Sophie, the little girl not so little now, who'd patted her hand on a living room floor, and told her it was okay to be sad, who'd nearly died, and taught her in the process the only thing she'd ever really needed to know. "I spent my whole life chasing happy," Victoria said finally. "I thought it was a thing you got to like a summit. You climb high enough, you make enough, you win enough, and you arrive at happy and you stay there." She shook her head slowly. It's not a summit. There's no summit. It's this. It's a lawn chair and a sunset and the people you didn't leave and who didn't leave you. It's the smallest thing in the world, and I couldn't see it for 60 years because I was looking too high. She reached over then and took Chloe's hand, and Chloe let her. So, yes, to answer your question, I'm happy. I'm happier in this backyard than I've ever been in any boardroom on earth, because I finally found the thing money could never buy. She looked around at all of them, her eyes bright. I found it late, but I found it, and that's more than a lot of people ever get. Sophie smiled satisfied and settled deeper against her father. Logan sat there in the last of the light, his daughter's head on his shoulder, and thought about a morning years ago when a woman worth $11 billion had looked at a drugstore photograph and said she wished she had a family like his, and he'd made a joke to keep the moment from crushing him. My kid probably needs a mom more than I need another medal. He'd been joking. He'd meant it as nothing, a way to survive an unbearable second. And it had turned out to be the truest thing he ever said. Not because Victoria became Sophie's mother. She never did. She never tried to be. But because that joke had cracked open a door, and through that door had walked the thing Logan had been told over and over that he could never give his daughter. Not a mother. Something else. A family stitched together out of loss and stubbornness and second chances, wider and stranger and more real than anything anyone had predicted. He'd buried his wife and been told he'd never manage. He'd raised a daughter alone and been told she'd suffer for it. He'd made a joke to a lonely billionaire and been told in 100 small ways over 100 small days that he was a fool for letting her in. And every single one of those voices had been wrong. Because sitting here in the gold, going to blue of a Virginia evening, with his healthy daughter against his shoulder and Emily's memory alive on the refrigerator inside, and a woman across the yard who'd sat 4 days in a hospital chair and never left. Logan Whitaker knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a man who had earned every inch of it, that the greatest victory of his life had never been a mission or a medal or anything the Navy could pin on his chest. It was this. It was the home he'd refused to stop building when the world told him it was impossible. It was a family that death had tried to take and couldn't. That loneliness had tried to claim and lost, that he had rebuilt from the ashes, with nothing but a promise to a woman he'd loved, and the sheer refusal to ever stop showing up. Emily. He thought, watching the last light go. I kept it. I told you I'd give her a childhood full of love, and I didn't know how, and I kept it anyway. Look at her. Look at all of them. I kept it. The sun went down over the small house near the base, over the old truck and the fixed-up backyard, and the drawings on the refrigerator, over 4 people in lawn chairs who had each lost something and found in one another a way to be whole again. And as the dark came on soft and warm, Logan pulled his daughter a little closer, and Victoria held her daughter's hand, and nobody said anything because nothing needed saying. Because the family you lose is never the end of your story. Because sometimes, if you refuse to stop showing up, life gives you a second chance to build a new one. And Logan Whitaker, Navy chief widower, single father, had done exactly that. He had taken the worst thing that ever happened to him, and one crooked braid, and one bad joke, and one kept promise at a time, built a home so full of love that not even death could empty it. That was the whole story. That was everything, and it was more than enough.